Welcome back to Oracles by MJ. I am She. Please don't forget to like and subscribe so I can hop in that algorithm. Want to see what that be like? Woman allegedly tries to drown child in Tellico Lake. A woman who allegedly tried to drown her child near the Sea Ray Boat Company in Vennore has been charged with attempted first-degree murder. Vennore Police Department Corey Fritz said on September 27th, a woman had driven to the factory and refused to stop at the security gate and was trying to drown a small child. Fritz said when the officers arrived, employees had taken the child away from the woman and she had taken off in her Ford Fusion, entered the Mastercraft property and drove the car into the water. Now, this woman tried to escape the scene by jumping back into the car, driving about 80 miles per hour into the water. The car sank. She's swimming through the window and out and trying to get back to shore, where she eventually ends up back where she left. The witnesses also said Upton was making the child drink twisted tea before taking her into the water. The people who pulled them out of the water told Fritz she was holding the child underwater with two hands and they had to forcefully take the child away from her. She was smoking Mary J and blowing it into this child's face. The child then said her mother drove her to an unknown place before going down to the lake into the water and putting her under the water. The child says she was scared until some man got her and took her to a nurse. Police said the child is safe and is being placed with relatives in Georgia. VPD said it is working with the Tennessee Department of Children's Services. Upton is charged with attempted first-degree murder, as she should be, aggravated child abuse, and DUI, according to her arrest reports. As of Friday, Upton had no bond. She is scheduled to appear in court on Monday. Today is Saturday. When was this uploaded? The 29th. She was seen. Harvard psychologist, 7 things most passive-aggressive people always do, and the number one way to respond. 1. Everything is fine. Similar signs saying, I'm not mad, or whatever, it doesn't bother me. 2. Silence, not returning phone calls or answering questions with short one-word responses. 3. Sarcasm, making a rude comment or joke that is indirectly intended to offend. 4. Mumbling under their breath, making dismissive or aggressive facial expressions that you are talking to someone behind your back but within earshot of you. 5. Withholding affection, not making eye contact or brushing off efforts to touch and reconnect. 6. Resentful agreement, saying fine, you win, and sulking after the fact. 7. Pretending to cooperate, saying yes to something but adding a poor job to spite you. The number one way to respond to passive-aggressive behavior, if you get any of these responses, I recommend respectfully communicating your experience of being around them. That should do it. APA warns of psychological impacts of violence in Middle East. The American Psychological Association has condemned in no uncertain terms the recent violent attack on Hamas on Israel. We are also deeply disturbed by the crisis of human suffering and loss of life and liberty for civilians who are caught in this escalating conflict. We recognize that the situation is complicated, but there can be no justification for acts of indiscriminate violence. There can be no justification for holding people hostage. There can be no justification for cutting off access to basic necessities, such as electricity, food, and medicine. APA is gravely concerned for the physical safety and mental health of the millions of Israelis and Palestinians affected by this growing surge in violence. APA deplores the human cost of aggression, including violations of human rights, adverse humanitarian consequences, deep psychological distress, and the loss of dignity and freedom. All individuals deserve to live free of fear and violence so that their mental health and well-being can flourish. We also condemn the rise of anti-Jewish and anti-Arab rhetoric as a result of this most recent conflict. There is much research outlining the immediate and long-term psychological impacts of violence and trauma on the people who are targets, especially civilians. Psychological science tells us that fear, anxiety, and traumatic stress have long-term effects on health and well-being. These impacts are also being felt by people around the world who have families and friends in the region, as well as those concerned about the effects of war everywhere. The psychology community stands in solidarity with all who are working to protect and safeguard human life during this conflict. Psychologists are experts in the science of human behavior. Problems cannot be solved without understanding their root cause. Prevention of violent conflict is imperative for a world in which mental health and well being are the norm, and to achieve peaceful, sustainable societies. We call for peace, dialogue, and conflict resolution as a pathway to ending the conflict, which is necessary for us to begin the work to prevent the suffering that will continue to result from ongoing violence. A surprising reason why depressed people do not get better. They may choose emotion regulation techniques that may make them feel worse. Verbatim. Published in the Journal of Psychopathology and Clinical Science, a recent study investigated emotion regulation strategies used by depressed patients. The data showed that compared to non-depressed individuals, depressed people are just as skilled in emotion management and yet more likely to choose emotion regulation strategies that decreased pleasant emotions. Conducted by Milgram and colleagues from Harvard University, Yale University, and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, this research is described below. Investigating emotion regulation in depression, Study 1. Sample 38 participants with depression and 39 controls. Methods. Participants were first taught how to use the emotion regulation techniques of distraction and rumination. They then applied these techniques to pleasant or unpleasant events from the past 6 months. Results. Depressed people were more likely to spontaneously choose the strategy of distraction when the recalled event was positive. This often led to reduced positive emotions. When instructed to pick the technique that would most likely make them feel happier, however, their choices resembled those of mentally healthy participants. So it appeared that the reason individuals with depression initially chose an inferior mood management strategy was not a lack of knowledge, but possibly a lack of motivation. Study 2 sampled 58 participants with depression and 62 without it. Methods. The study used ecological momentary assessments for 10 days, 4 surveys per day. The surveys included questions about mood, use of distraction and rumination, and motivation for pleasant and unpleasant emotions. Example, whether participants wanted to feel happy. Results. In agreement with the findings from the previous investigation, depressed participants were more likely than controls to distract themselves when experiencing pleasant emotions in daily life. As for motivation, participants in both groups preferred experiencing positive emotions, happiness and calmness. Nevertheless, compared to the healthy group, the group with depression was more willing to experience negative emotions, sadness, anxiety, and grief. This stronger willingness to experience negative emotions, the data suggested, predicted the use of more distraction from pleasant emotions, more negative rumination, increases in unpleasant affect, and decreases in pleasant affect. Ability versus willingness to feel better. An important research question is why depressed people use emotion regulation strategies that do not help them experience more happiness. Though no consensus has been reached, perhaps the answer depends on the person and the nature of their mental illness. Having said that, here is a list of potential reasons. Feeling undeserving of happiness. Fear of happiness, example, due to fear of loss or losing control. Having a goal other than to feel better. The challenge of identifying the best regulation strategy in the middle of intense negative emotions. The belief that emotional control is impossible. The familiarity of negative moods. The perception of negative emotions as more self-consistent than positive ones. Ineffective strategies learned or reinforced by depressed family and friends. Additional research is needed to evaluate the contribution of these causes, but the takeaway: depressed people appear to have the necessary knowledge and skills to self-regulate and cope with intense emotions, yet they use non-optimal emotion regulation strategies, possibly due to motivational reasons. This suggests that a person with depression could benefit from bringing greater awareness to how they usually respond to different emotions and why. For instance, by asking, how do I usually cope with potentially unpleasant feelings such as sadness, anxiety, anger, and grief? Do I enjoy feeling good? Do personal or environmental factors prevent me from using optimal emotion regulation strategies? This literally pertains to everything, because if you want it badly, you're going to make sure you obtain it. You're going to make sure you get it. If you want to change your attitude, you're going to make sure you do the work to develop and change. If you want a new outfit, you're going to do what you need to do to go out and buy it, right? Same thing applies on every level.